The presiding judge of the Karath Sovereignty Tribunal read the annexation decree from a prepared scroll which told me something by itself. They had written it out, had rehearsed the words. This was theater, not procedure, and the tribunal knew the difference better than most. I had been sitting at the respondent's rail for 40 minutes. No aide, no legal counsel, no diplomatic second. Just myself and the sealed case on the rail in front of me, which I had not opened and did not intend to open until I was asked a direct question. The Karath delegation occupied 3 tiers to my left, 14 members in formal GREY, and they had not looked at me once since the session opened. That was theater too. Judge Serath Orvann read slowly. The Orveth Reach was enumerated by system, Orveth Prime, the 6 secondary bodies, the transit corridor running from the AETHREN junction to the deparm relay at MARENT station. Humanity had held and worked those 7 systems for 82 years, built the stations, laid the corridor, buried our dead in the secondary body soil when the Reach fever took them in the early decades. The judge described all of it as unclaimed territory. He finished reading. The chamber was quiet. He set the scroll flat on the bench and looked at me for the first time. The tribunal has noted that no formal claim of title has been filed by the Terran Compact over the Orveth Reach territories, he said. The Compact is invited to respond. I looked at him for a moment, then I looked at the sealed case. I have a question for the tribunal, I said, before I respond. The judge's outer hearing membranes flat ridges of scaled tissue along his jaw, a Karath reading organ expanded slightly. Surprise. He masked it almost immediately. Proceed. The case in front of me contains a document, I said. I would ask the chamber to identify it before I describe it myself. I find identification carries more weight when it comes from the bench. A murmur moved through the Karath delegation. One of the members in the upper tier leaned down toward a colleague and said something in low Karath that the room's translation relay did not carry. The judge's hearing membranes pulled flat again, the Karath expression for careful attention. You may open the case, he said. I unsealed it. Inside, fitted in archival fabric, was a bound folio, cream-colored material, 80 years old, the binding darkened at the spine with age. I lifted it and set it on the presentation rail without opening it. The chamber went very still. I saw it reach them in sequence from the bench outward. The judge saw the binding first, then the color of the material, then the seal on the lower right corner, a pressed Karath sovereign mark, the older form, the one from the Sovereignty Wars period when the mark had still been hand-stamped rather than machine-engraved. His hearing membranes did not move at all. The tribunal will need a moment, he said. Of course, I said. He conferred with the 2 associate judges beside him, voices low in Karath. One of them stood and moved to a secondary terminal at the rear of the bench. I watched the delegate in the upper tier, the one who had leaned down earlier. He had gone very straight in his seat. His hands, resting on the armrest in front of him, were not moving. The associate judge returned to the bench. Orvann listened to what she said. Then he looked at me. You are representing, he said carefully, that this is the original Karath founding charter, the instrument executed at the close of the Sovereignty Wars. I am not representing anything, I said. I asked the tribunal to identify it. Has it done so? A long pause. The tribunal requires confirmation of provenance. The Compact's archive seal is on the rear cover, I said. The intake date is stamped in the lower margin. 82 years, 4 months, 17 days ago. 3 weeks after the Orveth Reach was assigned to Terran administration as a condition of Karath recognition under Article 7 of the Settlement Instruments. I paused. Which are appendices to the document currently on the rail. The chamber was not quiet anymore. The murmur that moved through the Karath tier was different from the one before, lower, shorter, cut off faster, which in my experience means the people doing the murmuring are not entirely sure they want the room to hear their reaction. Judge Orveth was still looking at the folio. The Karath founding charter was the document that had made them a recognized sovereignty. Without it, they were a coalition of settled systems operating under provisional interstellar status, able to trade, able to negotiate, but not ceded, not voting, not protected by the Compact's mutual defense provisions. The charter had been their legitimacy for 82 years, and they had written it at the negotiating table where they also handed us the Orveth Reach. The two things were not separate transactions. They were the same transaction, bound in the same document, sealed by the same press. To annex the Reach was to declare that the transaction had not been valid. I had not said any of this. I did not need to. The tribunal will recess, Orveth said. I understand, I said. The case will remain on the rail. He looked at it, then at me. His hearing membranes had not moved in 4 minutes, which I took as a sign that he was no longer performing any particular response. He was simply sitting with what was in front of him. The recess lasted 29 minutes. I remained at the rail. An aide appeared at my elbow at the 12-minute mark and offered water. I thanked her and declined. The Karath delegation stayed in their tier, but the formation had broken. Delegates were in small clusters, speaking quietly among themselves, and the upper-tier delegate who had gone rigid earlier had moved down to the second tier and was speaking with what looked like the delegation's senior counsel. Neither of them glanced in my direction, which told me they were not looking for a way out of the room. They were looking for a way out of the document. At the 18-minute mark, the senior counsel from the upper tier crossed the floor and spoke quietly to the bench clerk. The clerk consulted a terminal, nodded, and the counsel returned to his cluster. I did not know what he had asked. I knew what he had learned because the cluster went still for a moment, and then the conversation resumed at a lower register, the particular quiet of people who have just confirmed what they were hopping not to confirm. There was no way out of the document. I had been an archivist for 21 years before I was an ATTACHE acute. And one thing archivists understand that other people sometimes do not is this: a document does not care what happens after it is signed. It does not become less real because someone finds it inconvenient. It does not fade. It does not renegotiate. It sits in its case in the dark and it waits, and it is exactly as binding on the day you open it as it was on the day the press came down. The Karath had forgotten about the Reach. Not the territory, they clearly remembered the territory, had spent significant resources preparing an annexation decree and convincing 14 senior delegates to attend a formal session over it. What they had forgotten was that the Reach was not a footnote to their founding. It was the price of it. The two things were the same thing, and the same document said so. The bench returned. Orveth sat for a moment before speaking. The tribunal has identified the document, he said, and notes that the question of the Orveth Reach's status cannot be separated from the instruments of the Karath sovereign recognition, without implication for those instruments themselves. He paused. The tribunal requires time to review the relevant provisions. Of course, I said. The Compact's representative is thanked for attending. The Compact is always glad to assist the tribunal, I said. I closed the case, sealed it, and stood. The Karath delegation did not look at me as I walked out. I did not look at them either. There was nothing to see there that I had not already seen at the bench, 14 delegates who had come to a hearing to claim something that had been theirs for less than an hour before they understood what claiming it would cost. The annexation motion was quietly withdrawn 11 days later. No new motion was filed. No statement was issued. The tribunal's scheduling office noted a recess of indeterminate length and did not follow up. I put the charter back in the deep archive when I returned to station, resealed the case, logged it, put it back on the shelf in the dark. Some documents you use once and then let rest. They have earned the quiet.